Hello, Adam here, and in this video, I'd like to do is give an introduction to anyone who's very new to Fantasy Cruncher. I've seen videos made about like how to use the tool and stuff like that, but I really want to approach it from basically from where I came from. I've probably been using Fantasy Cruncher. I have been for about 2 to 3 years, and I saw the tools and how things were made, but I was very frustrated at the beginning, and I want to use this video series. I'm hoping to make several videos on this to help people like me who are very new into Fantasy Cruncher or any type of optimizer to understand how to use it to do exactly what you want it to do. And that's what an optimizer is. An optimizer at its core is just your expression of what you would like to do in 150 lineups or 100 or however many lineups you want to put in. And I think this is a really key takeaway from an optimizer. You don't just press the button and let things go. The optimizer is a tool to let you do what you wanted to do if you were hand building 150 lineups. At least that's the intent. And with that said, it gives you lots of tools to do what you want to do and customize. But that means with great power comes great responsibility. And that's what Fantasy Cruncher and other optimizers allow you to do. And so I've got one rule when it comes to Fantasy Cruncher, and I made it as generic as I possibly could be. The one rule of Fantasy Cruncher is you are the problem. If the program is not doing and spitting out the lineups that you wanted it to spit out, the problem is not the program. The problem is you. The problem is you. And I've done this, like I said, I've used the tool for 3 years. I've had several problems. I'm like, this has got to be a bug. And it's always been me. It's always been a rule I set or something I missed or I didn't understand how things kind of work together. It's always me. And so with that said, I'm going to go through the very basics. So I'm in Fantasy Cruncher. I went to NFL and hit DraftKings. And what's really cool is it's got stuff in there for you. So you can start like pumping out lineups right away. And I'm going to do it, right? This is like straight out of the box. I changed one little setting that is really irrelevant. It just helps the lineups crunch faster. So I'm going to go crunch 150 lineups. So I'm in Fantasy Cruncher, right? I'm crunching 150 lineups using my projections. So I say my projections here. And I hit the crunch button. And I get stuff. Yay! Like it works. Awesome. So immediately right out of the gate, I love this. You press a button and things work. Which is fantastic, except it's probably not doing what you want it to do. So I press the button, I'm like, great, go upload to DraftKings and see if I can win some money. Yeah, not entirely. And this is really important. So in this button, you can see if you scroll up, here's all the players and everything you can do. You could tab through the positions, etc. This is how you crunch. And then underneath it, it'll always, whenever you hit crunch, it'll always set the display to this. You can see your crunches. Here's my first crunch. It had these players. Second crunch had these players, etc. And what's really cool, this left tab bar, I live in this left tab bar because it tells me my exposures. So you can see in my exposure tab here, Juju Smith-Schuster is showing up in 97%, 97.3% of 150 crunches. This is like not what I expected. I don't want him to be in 97% of all my lineups. This is bad, to say the least. Maybe you want that much exposure or whatever. And you can see Kelsey's in there, 83%. Saquon's 86. This is 2022 week 1. And you're probably looking at Fantasy Cruncher like it's an idiot. And you're like, Fantasy Cruncher, why in the world do you think that I want 150 of my lineups to have Juju in it? And you have to remember, the problem is not Fantasy Cruncher. You are the problem. And there are ways to, we'll talk about this some other time, about how to cap things. But man, this is way too much. Like if I was doing 150 lineups, I don't want like the combination of lineups where basically almost every lineup has these 4 players and like Chase Edmonds and Jamar Chase. I don't want that. You can also like tab over by position. You can see where your exposure is, right? So you can see by position where your exposure is. And you're probably looking at this like, I didn't want 50% Vikings defense. This stupid Fantasy Cruncher doesn't know what it's doing. No, it knows what it's doing. You've got to be able to tell it what to do. And the first thing that's super duper important is you want variance in your lineups. Now, How much variance do you want is up to you. But you can see here that if I go to settings, and I'll quickly go back here, I go to advanced options up here. I live in this advanced options tab, and it's got really cool tabs. We'll hit on some of these in other videos. But right now in the general, this is like a key thing that you need to decide for yourself. How many unique players per lineup do you want? And with one unique player, what that means is every lineup's got to have at least one person who's unique from all the other lineups. So you could have a lineup with everyone exactly the same, and just the defense is different. And then so you could run that with like, let's say you picked a $3,000 defense. You could pick the same lineup with like 10 different defenses. It could be all the same players and then like 10 different defenses. That's probably too little variance for what I want. And so you can decide how many unique players you want. And the answer to how many you should set is really a preference for the kind of player that you are and how much risk do you want to take on. The more concentrated your pool is, I feel like the more risk you take on. So if you've got 90% Juju and Juju has a bad game, guess what? 90% of your lineups are dead in the water. But there's like a balance to that. Again, we're talking a little bit about game theory. So how many uniques you want? I have homework for you, by the way. I challenge you to set this to like 2 uniques, run a crunch, 3 uniques, run a crunch, and see 2 things. One is what is the highest percentage exposure you have? I'll just run one while we're kind of doing this. I'll run it with like 3. Let's see what happens if I run it with 3. I want you to run it with each amount of unique players, and then decide or then look just to see 2 things. One is what is my highest exposure player with, with 1 unique, it was like 97% Juju. With 3 uniques, it was like 90%. I wonder what this looks like with 5 uniques. Let's just see what it looks like, right? Hit the crunch button, and let's just see what happens. And all of a sudden, Juju is immediately like, he's still high up there, but he's gone down significantly, right? He's going down more. And again, this correlation, you just need to understand how the program is thinking. If I'm allowing 5 unique players, meaning in every lineup there has to be 5 unique players between this lineup and every other lineup I crunch, you can see how it's driving down your exposures. So I challenge you to look at this for each unique and see that. And the other thing you need to look at is your total amount of players used. Remember, the more concentrated or the fewer uniques you have, the fewer players you're going to use. So again, I'll go back to our first crunch, which had 1 unique. And you can see it only used 52 players. And in 3 uniques, it was 66 players. And with 5 uniques, I'm up to 81 players. So there's obvious correlation between how many unique players you have per lineup and like your total pool. And you need to set something that is right for you. I think that's really important. The other thing that I want to bring out, and this is a very introductory video, because this is the thing that bothered me the most, is why, like, I'll go back to the crunch with the 1 unique, right? Why in the world does fantasycruncher think that Chase Edmonds and Saquon might be okay? Why in the world does fantasycruncher think Chase Edmonds is the second best running back on the slate? Because that is absolutely not what I think. I think there are some really good running backs on the slate that are much better than Chase Edmonds. So why in the world is a stupid program telling me that you should play a lot of Chase Edmonds? The answer is the program is only doing what you're telling it to do. And this was a lifesaver for me when I started doing fantasycruncher. And I can know, this is cool, I can know before I even start who the players are going to be that fantasycruncher is saying. For instance, I'll go to the running back, since that's what we were using, right? And you can see, this is really cool, by the way, you can see in your latest crunch, or the crunch you have selected, you can actually see your exposures to all the players, right? So there it is, used. Jonathan Taylor, not used at all. Derrick Henry, these are the highest priced guys, right? Like Austin Eckler used 3%, the highest priced guy's not used at all. And you're probably thinking, I want to play these players, at least some. Like, this is ridiculous, 0%. The answer is fantasycruncher is just doing what you're telling it to. And the The life-changing from fantasy cruncher standpoint was when I sorted this by value. This is really, really big. So I'm going to press this value button, and this is going to sort descending by value. And what you're going to see here is all it's doing, this value for Saquon is 3.2. All it's doing is it's taking its projection, which you put in. Maybe you got it from some website, whatever. This is in your control. I can go in here and change Saquon's projection to 200 million, or I can change it to 15. I can change it to whatever I want. I can press, I think I can press a button and change it back to where it was before, right? I am in charge of my projections. So Saquon's projection is 19.68, and his salary is 6,100. You see what's going to happen here, right? I'm going to open up a calculator just so we can do the math ourselves. What's 19.68 divided by 6,100? There it is. I mean, you can multiply by the digits. 3.2. There it is. You do this for every single player. It's got a value. And so now what you're realizing is Fantasy Cruncher is simply saying, what are the best value plays, and play those players. So guess what? The people I have the most exposure to are the ones that have the highest value. Huh. It's all dependent on the projections that I put in. So Fantasy Cruncher gives you some projections or whatever. You can use those. You put your own projections. You can up or move projections up or down. But at the end of the day, you are in charge of making sure you have projections that you trust. And if you think Chase Edmonds shouldn't be at 16, well, then don't put him at 16. I'll quickly show you how this changes, right? So let's say you really wanted to play Jonathan Taylor, right? And you can see his value is 2.4, not used at all. Let's say you set his, projection. Let's just say you set it to like 40. I want to make sure I get Jonathan Taylor. And so now if I went to this tab and I just typed him in to get him, and then you can X out of it, it gets to all the players. So if I go back to sorting by value again, guess what? Jonathan Taylor, far and away the best player value-wise, because I gave him a projection of 40. So guess how much Jonathan Taylor you're going to get in your lineups? Oh, I need to change my uniques. Did I change my uniques back? I didn't even change my uniques back, did I? I'm still in 5. Even at 5 uniques, like, check this out. Jonathan Taylor, 100%. He's that good of a value, of course, if you projected him for 40 points. All Fantasy Cruncher is doing is it's taking the inputs you give it and spitting out the best lineups from a value standpoint. That's all it's doing. And if you're ever confused about why it ever gives you a certain player more than other players, you can always go, like, look at this hilarious, right? You're like, Mitchell Trubisky, he's the best quarterback play on the slate? Wow. I don't know. Let's find out. Quarterback tab. I scroll over here. I see the value. And guess who's the best value play? Mitchell Trubisky, projected at 18.6. Maybe you don't think he should be projected that much. Change it. 18.6 divided by a salary of 5,000 is a 3.7 value. And that's why Mitchell Trubisky is played the most. That is the basic introduction to what Fantasy Cruncher is doing behind the scenes. It's simply taking the projections that you give it with that variance and uniques, which I think you should play around with and decide what's right for you. And then just giving you the best value plays spit out in a lineup. Obviously, there's significantly more that you want to do. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk about stacking. You probably don't want to play Mitchell Trubisky by himself. You probably don't want to play Joe Burrow by himself. You probably want to play him with one of his wide receivers or 2 of his wide receivers. And so we'll talk about how to set that up in the next video. But I hope this was a good introduction. It's really important that you understand, especially at the beginning, what in the world Fantasy Cruncher is doing and why it's doing it, so that you can make rules and tell Fantasy Cruncher to do the things that you want it to do, so that you make the lineups that you really want.